Let's have a nice cup of TRE in the afternoon with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Teralyn Pilgrim. She's the author of a fabulous sounding book. We're not talking about this today. I just have to mention it because I love the title. Don't Dance on the Toilet and Other Things I Never Thought I'd Say to My Kids. Love it. But we're talking about her new book today, No Scrap Left Behind, My Life Without Food Waste. It's the story of a mother's quest to end her family's food waste and all the blunders that came with it. Welcome to the show, Teralyn.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. I have to just commenting on your previous book. I love the title. It's great.
Oh, thank you so much.
It must have been fun to write.
Oh, yeah, it was. It kind of helped me deal with the challenges of motherhood, to have a sense of humor about it.
Yeah, brilliant. So this new one is a really fascinating project. You were kind of inspired by a story of hungry children that filled you with guilt and made you want to make changes.
Yeah, I think most of us feel a little bit of guilt when we throw away food. And I just got to the point where I just realized I was doing something to myself. You know, like we think of waste as hurting other people, but the fact that I was wasting resources of mine that I could use to feed my family and feeling guilty about it, I was like, I don't need to have all these negative feelings anymore because this is a behavior I can easily change.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that it starts with the fact that most of us buy too much food. That's the biggest change I suppose we could all make.
Definitely. That's probably the most important step. But also, meal planning helps a lot because we'll buy food without really knowing what we're going to do with it. But also being able to come up with recipes because, you know, most recipes that we, you know, like when we plan for a meal, we end up having to buy more than we need. You know, like maybe we need 2 carrots, but we buy a whole bag of carrots. Mm. So learning how to eat what you have is also a very important step.
Yeah. So how did you go about making these big changes then? Where did you start?
Well, a lot of it was trial and error because I didn't have a book like this to kind of guide me through. I would have an article that would have 10 pieces of advice that you could read in 5 minutes. And I wanted to get to zero food waste or at least see how close I could get. So I'd run into a hurdle and have to come up with a solution and then write it down and move on from there.
I love the fact that one of the things you talk about, rule number 1, the hungry kid test. Would you throw something edible away with a hungry child watching? If the answer is yes, then it can go in the compost. If the answer is no, then it's time to get creative. I love that.
Oh, thank you. And that was another one of those hurdles of necessity is if I wanted to claim that I had reduced to zero food, then I kind of had to decide what was food and what counted as waste. You know, like I didn't feel like I had to eat banana peels, you know, that it was like a moral obligation or a financial burden if I threw away banana peels. And so that's kind of how I came up with a standard of how I was going to do things.
One of the things you talk about in the book, which I'm interested to hear a bit more about, is expiration dates. You say they don't really mean anything.
They don't. And a lot of people think they're required by law. I've heard so many people say, man, I wish the government didn't require expiration dates. But the government doesn't require it. It's just something that consumers expect. And they're not regulated and they're sporadic. You know, you don't have like this scientific process they go through where like they eat boxes once a month for years. And then they find one where they're like, oh, these crackers are stale on this day. You know, they just have to kind of guess and they're just kind of, I don't know, throwing numbers around and they don't really mean anything.
So how do you, I guess, then know when something has gone off or not? What should we be doing? So if we ignore the dates, what should we be doing instead?
Well, our bodies are very good at knowing what we can and can't eat. You know, we have this revulsion and this disgust response. And I've also noticed that food will start to not taste great or look great before it becomes unsafe. You know what I mean? Like, you know, if there's a peach that has mold on it or it's mushy or it smells fermented, like our bodies know not to eat it. Well, before you get to that point, it's going to get softer than you'd want to eat it anyway. Like, so crackers are going to taste stale for a long time before they get that really, like, I don't know if you've tasted something dried that's like really, it kind of tastes like bones, because it's got like that really awful dry. So there's actually quite a bit of margin of error there before you get to the point where like this is going to make you sick, and you're going to know once the food gets to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just using common sense then, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, don't mess around with mold. Don't mess around like if meat gets slimy or things change color. You don't need to make those risks, but deep down what the risks are.
Yeah. You also address various myths in the book, the idea that being waste-free is too hard for most people, and you're saying it's not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe getting to zero, that was a challenge for me, especially if you don't have chickens or livestock to help you along. But you can make drastic changes to your life. I feel that everyone, including like restaurants, grocery stores, and farmers, can cut their food waste in half with minor changes. And then applying yourself and practicing, you can get further and further and further.
Yeah. So with things like, for example, the other day I had often tomatoes, baby tomatoes, they don't last as long as you'd hope they would. And sometimes when they go all wrinkly, that kind of thing, you think, oh, it's gone. You wouldn't really want to have it in a salad or anything because it's gone wrinkly. But probably the reality is it quite possibly tastes absolutely fine and doesn't need to be thrown away. But because it doesn't look its best, you think, oh, that's, I'm not going to have that. What kind of things can we do in that situation?
Well, in that specific situation, I probably would have just cooked them. With most tomatoes, we think of cooking them, but like cherry tomatoes, we feel like we're supposed to eat them raw, but you don't necessarily. But one of the first steps in this journey that I took, that everyone needs to think about, is think about food differently. We have like these standards. Like if you eat food past its expiration date, there's a level of shame to it, of people looking down on you. And then there's like scraps that are perfectly edible, but people think of as garbage, like, potato peels and carrot peels and cauliflower leaves. And little blemishes on food that doesn't make it unsafe or even taste different, or maybe that you could just cut off. Just having a different standard, I think. And so maybe a wrinkly tomato doesn't look great, but you're right, it tastes great. And things don't have to fit this standard of perfection that our culture has placed on us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? We're used to seeing perfect looking food on Instagram and things. So we have this idea that our food should be looking perfect all the time, which is silly.
Right. Because nobody else sees what we're doing, right? Like, who are we trying to impress with our salad?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing you said, which made me smile, was even if I can't change how much food the world wastes, it feels good to look at this problem and say with absolute honesty that I have nothing to do with it. That's great. And I think with a lot of these world problems, we think, well, what difference am I going to make? But obviously, if everybody thought that, no one would ever change. So all we can do is change ourselves. So that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's very cleansing, to feel like you weren't a part of a problem, to feel that guilt for a while and then be released from that. It just, like, my spirit felt lighter once I started changing the way I eat.
Yeah. So can you give us an example then, how your week looks in terms of how organized you are and how you go about not having any food waste?
Well, when I stopped wasting food, I actually started cooking a lot less. And it's not that I eat leftovers all the time, but I can upcycle food, so I'll change a meal. I can just about make soup any day. I could make soup every day if my family would let me, because it's just so easy to whip stuff together. So I'd say at least once a week, I just kind of get all the scraps out and whip something up. A couple times a week, we eat leftovers. I might have freezer meals in the freezer that I can whip out at any time that was like I doubled the recipe from a few weeks before, or maybe I made something and realized we weren't going to finish it and put it in the freezer. So changing the way I did that, like I really don't have to spend nearly as much time cooking as I used to.
Yeah. And do you go shopping once a week or do you go shopping more regularly?
Well, it's my husband that goes shopping now, and he likes to go frequently. There's pluses and minuses either way. You know, a lot of people do impulse buys when they go shopping a lot and then end up with too much food, or they don't plan for the food they're going to get. But on the other hand, if you're buying for a long period of time, like a week or 2 weeks, it's hard to get the amounts exactly right. So one of the things I talk about in the book is some people, like in other countries, go grocery shopping every single day, but only buy as much as they're going to eat that day. If you do that, you're not going to waste very much because you might say to yourself, like, ooh, this cake looks delicious, but I don't want cake today, so I'll come back and get it tomorrow. So we kind of have this pack rat mentality where we feel comfortable being surrounded by life-saving resources, right? If we have a full pantry, we feel good. But sometimes planning only 1 or 2 days ahead can have a lot of benefit.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So much of it is just being organized.
Yes, definitely. And a lot of it has to do with personality. You know, asking yourself, am I really going to cook this much? Am I really going to like this meal enough to eat it as many times as it's going to take for, you know what I mean? Like, if you don't have an organized pantry, you're going to run into expiration dates a lot. But if your pantry is organized or there's not much in it, then you don't have to worry about expiration dates because you're never going to even get close to the date that's on the can. So it just really has to do with like, what are you good at? What are you capable of? What do you like? And how are you going to make adjustments to the lifestyle and the personality that you have to keep this waste from happening?
Yeah. Has it been difficult with your family? Because it's obviously, you know, you've got the mindset and you've got the organization, but you have to get everybody in the household to be on board with what you're doing, don't you? Was that tricky?
No, actually, it was a lot easier. Now, my kids were fairly young because, you know, with kids, you have to get over the ick factor, you know, or habits that you've set in your family. But because my children were young, this is just how they were raised. And in school now, they'll go to school and they'll see a kid throw away their lunch and they're like, what are you doing? You know, or like one of them, they'll have breakfast in the classroom. And then the teacher just doesn't want to deal with kids like putting their food in their backpacks for later. It's just something she just doesn't want to handle. So she just makes them throw away their breakfast if they haven't finished it. My daughter came home and told me, she's like, my teacher is making me throw away my food. And then my husband, he realized pretty quickly how much money we were saving. And he's always been supportive, thought it would be a good thing to try. And it's not that hard for him because there's just a rule that only mommy throws away food. So he'll put something in the fridge or he'll put something in the counter and he might think like this is probably going to end up in the trash, but I'm not the one putting in the trash. Mommy does that.
So you're the only one that's allowed to.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's worked out pretty well.
Nice one. Well, I think it's great what you're doing. How long have you been doing it for then?
So I started in 2017, and I've been keeping it up pretty well since then. The goal to get to 0 was for 2 years. It was originally 1. I decided to do it for 2, and so I'm not at it. It's not like the super stringent thing that I used to have, where I wanted to like test myself and push myself. Right now, I'm at the point where I've taken everything I've learned, drastically changed my life, drastically saved money. And it's like easier and relaxing now. It's just something I don't really think about anymore.
Yeah, amazing. And what about going out? What about when you do you go out for dinner and things like that? I mean, how do you handle that if you're served like a massive portion or you don't really like it or?
Yeah, I always bring food home. I mean, when I go out to eat, I expect to get 2 meals out of it, actually, because they give you such huge portions. And if food isn't good, I can take it home. Like, I don't know, I had an omelet that had way too many onions and bell peppers in it. And it felt weird taking a container of bell peppers and onions and no egg home with me. But I took it home and I put it in a stir fry. So you can get creative with things that other people have made just as well as you can with things that you've made.
Yeah, clever. Well, if people want to be inspired further, they should definitely get a copy of the book. It's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's called No Scrap Left Behind, My Life Without Food Waste. And it's by Teralyn Pilgrim, who we've been chatting with today. Teralyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again.